have with us Marian Wrightington, who is the chair of the Attleboro Historical Commission.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Raise your hand if you're a Capron. Oh, wow, look at them all. Oh, thank you all for coming. And I should have said, or if you lived in a Capron house. We've got a couple of those over here, too. So anyway, thank you all for coming, like I said. When I told Rachel I would do this program, it was right after I had 8 Caprons from Arizona and Pennsylvania call me. They were here in Attleboro to visit the park and the zoo, and they called me for a tour of my house. The group included 2 10-year-old twins, and the rest were much older. They loved the house, and after they left, I started wondering if they really were aware of what all the Caprons had done and made such an impact, not only on Attleboro, but all around the world. So I thought maybe I should start spreading the word. So here I am. I apologize to any of you if you've heard my stories before. I do like to tell my stories a lot. And I'm calling them stories, and as long as I'm mentioning stories, I'm going to say they could be hearsay, they could be folklore, or they could be the complete truth. But some of my stories and facts are so old that they could have been exaggerated and changed through the years. So I hope they are all the truth. I decided I should start with the first Capron to come to America. His name was Banfield Capron, and he came from England in 1674, and he was 14 years old. He had 3 friends with him, and they were all 14, and they were stowaways. They climbed into the ship the night before they knew that it was going to sail and hid for 4 days until they came out. The captain wanted to return them, but the passengers persuaded the captain to keep going, so he did. It was, they were 4 days out. It would have taken them 4 days to go back and drop the kids off, and then 4 days to get where they were already. So I can understand that, but 4 14-year-olds, that was scary, if you ask me. So that's how he got here. Years went by, he got older, he bought a lot of land, he got married 3 times, and had 12 children. One son was Joseph, born in 1691, and he was a captain in the local militia. And he is the Capron who built my house. He built it around the time Banfield married his 3rd wife, and Joseph, Jr., married his 2nd wife. The 2nd floor of the house has a bake oven. Well, the 1st floor does too, but you expect that. The whole house has 6 fireplaces and 2 bake ovens. But there's a bake oven on the 2nd floor. And I thought that was kind of strange, but then when I heard that Banfield moved in there when he had just married his 3rd wife and all of his children were grown and gone. And his son Joseph downstairs had the other bake oven, but he still had some kids at home. So I'm thinking that this is probably the very first in-law apartment in the world. Yeah. Well, it could be, they all started somewhere. Joseph Jr. was the 3rd person to sign the covenant that Rachel was talking about tonight, that you can buy copies of tonight. He was the 3rd person. You can see where he signed it right there. And then we're going to have that talk again in spring all about it. But then there was Seth Capron. He did not live in my house, but he was Banfield's great-great-grandson. At age 19, he enlisted, served as a private, and then corporal, eventually being attached to General Lafayette's corps. He actually took a cannonball aimed at Lafayette. And this is one of those, they say it grazed the top of his head. This is one of those stories that you kind of wonder about, because I've also read that it was a bullet that got him. And so we don't know if it was a cannonball or a bullet, but something that was meant for Lafayette, and he took it. Eventually, he was transferred to West Point under General George Washington. This man only worked for the best. Served the rest of the war there. He commanded the barge that conveyed General Washington. This is Washington standing up in the boat, waving to his crew that he's leaving. And the man in the white shirt at the back here, he's got the rudder in his hands, and he was steering the boat. That was him. So that was when George Washington was leaving his troops to go to Elizabethtown. And he was, our Capron was the last one to receive George Washington's benediction and blessing. After the war, he returned to Attleboro and began the study of medicine under Dr. Basil Mann, a well-known physician. Dr. Capron, or Seth, eventually married Eunice Mann, the doctor's daughter. They moved to Oneida, New York, and eventually had 4 sons. Besides his medical profession, he took an interest in manufacturing. He wanted our country to be independent of clothing that was all coming from England, and he wanted them to be independent of England. So he built our country's first cotton mill, and after that, the first woolen mill. And he actually even was the first person to import merino sheep so that he could have the merino wool for the wool factory. And this laid the foundation for, these mills laid the foundation for our great industries. He died in 1835 in Walden, New York. Then there was Jacob Capron, a great-grandchild of Banfield. He was born in 1784, and he lived in my house. That's Seth and his wife. The house was kept in the family from about 1740, because that's when they think the house was built, until 1955. It was just all Caprons. They swapped it around from generation to generation, and all parts of the family lived there for 215 years, the same family. So I'm actually only the 4th owner of a house that's 280 years old. I moved in 1966, and it's supposed to be about 280 years old now. And the person that I bought it from is here tonight, Connie Capron Williams. I mean, not Corkum. Well, see, she was almost a Capron because she lived in the Capron house. But anyway, back to Jacob. He was a farmer and a builder. And in 1828, the town asked him to build a townhouse for their meetings. They paid him $80 to do it. And I think he had to buy the materials with the $80. The town held their meetings there for 60 years. It was on West Street, right across from Clifton Street. And the location had to be there because it was the geographical center of Attleboro when Attleboro and North Attleboro were one. And that was so everybody could come equal distances to the town meetings. And the building's gone now, but on the corner of West and Clifton, there's a stone marker, there it is, that was put there by the DAR telling all about how Uncle Jake Capron built that house. When I first moved into my house, I wanted to find out everything about it. Betty Phillips was the chairman of the Historical Commission, and she did everything she could to help me. She thought it was a Capron house, but some folks told me the Capron house had been next door and it had been demolished. I'm from Mansfield, and my parents used to bring us to Capron Park when we were little, so I really wanted it to be a Capron house, but I had to prove it. One day we went up in the attic, and we took up a couple of floorboards above the second floor bake oven. If you've got your first floor, and then you've got your second floor, and then the attic floor would be the 3rd floor, but you could take up the floorboards up there and go down on top of the bake oven. We were young and stupid, because I would never let anybody do that today. So my husband went down in, and he came back out, and he had this little box. And it's just a bunch of little, this is a boar's head bristle brush that the animals had eaten all the bristles off of. And this is a tortoiseshell comb that the ladies would have put in their hair, and they've eaten the tongs off of that or whatever. Then there's a little knob, just a little knob off of something, and a couple of fine-tooth combs that they used to use to get the lice out of their hair, but the mice have also been chewing on those. So on the end of the box, it says, ladies' cotton hose. So that didn't tell me anything. But on the bottom of the box, it says Deborah Capron. Yes, yay. She'd written her name on the bottom of the box, so there was my proof it was the Capron house. So I was all excited. Doesn't take much. The next Capron is Dennis, born in 1802, and he lived in the red house on the corner of Dennis Street and Mechanic. Built around 1763, and it's still there. Dennis Street probably got its name from him, Dennis Capron. His children were Harford, Everett, and Eliza. And there's the three children and the father in the middle. After their father died, they gave the land for Capron Park to the city in memory of their father. Then in 1937, Harford, which is one of the boys, provided a trust fund of $23,000 for a zoo to be added to the park. And we all love Capron Park and the zoo. And like they said, Rachel has Christmas balls with Capron Park on it tonight for sale if anybody's interested. She's holding them up there. Then we have Joseph Willard Capron. He was born in Attleboro. Most all these Caprons were born in Attleboro. But you know, I should mention too, there's a cemetery in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, that has something like 180 Caprons in it. It's just unbelievable. They went everywhere, all over the world. And that's what I wanted to spread, that these people, even though they were born in Attleboro and from Attleboro, they didn't just stay in Attleboro. They went everywhere and did everything. Then we have Joseph Willard Capron. And he was born in Attleboro in 1802. Banfield was his great-great-grandfather. Otis was his father. He was educated in the schools of Attleboro and Boston University. In 1818, he started surveying. He was named the town surveyor, and he did the 1832 map, which Rachel also has copies of for sale tonight. And you can see right up here, it says by Joseph Capron. He also helped lay out the Boston to Providence Railroad. He was into everything. Listen to this. He was Justice of the Peace for 50 years, County Commissioner for 3 terms, Selectman, Overseer of the Poor, Town Assessor for several terms, President of the Attleboro Mutual Fire Insurance Company, President of the Loan and Fund Association of Attleboro, and listen to this one, Treasurer of the Norfolk and Bristol County Horse Thief Detective Society. Now, you laugh, but just about every town back in that day and age had a horse thief detective society because I guess they had this big problem with people stealing their horses. And they had to have people go out and try and find out who was doing it. He was also president of the Gaslight Union Company of Attleboro. He never went to a doctor, and he never had a sick day. At 80 years old, he would go out with all of his surveying instruments and do a day's work. One day, at night, he walked from Pawtucket to his home in Attleboro, which was 9 miles. He was 80 years old, and he said he could have walked back again without resting. He died when he was 93. Horace Capron was born in 1804 in Attleboro. He was Dr. Seth Capron's son, and his sister, Louisa Thayers, was born in 1814 and died in 1926. Did you catch those dates? She was the first verified person to reach the age of 111 in 1925. But back to Horace. His father had opened some woolen mills, so with that experience, Horace became the supervisor of several cotton mills. He was an officer in the Maryland militia. In 1834, he married Louisa Snowden and had 6 children. He became involved in the mechanization of cotton mills and started the town of Laurel, Maryland. And you know, so he started the town of Laurel, Maryland. Do you all realize there's a Capron, Virginia? There's a town in Virginia named Capron. Then there's one in Illinois, and I think there's one in Wisconsin. Whoever's saying yes, do you know about the one in Wisconsin?
I know the Illinois and the Virginia.
Okay.
I've been to the one in Illinois.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Huh. So anyway, he started this town of Laurel, Maryland. I don't know why he didn't call it Capron, but anyway. During the Civil War, he was the oldest officer in the Union Army and reached the rank of colonel. Soon after that, he was named Commissioner of the Department of Agriculture for the United States. These people they were all from Attleboro, but they went on to do such crazy things, you know, which led him to being asked to go to Japan as a special advisor. He went and he introduced large-scale farming with American methods, and he was very successful. It was very successful. In 1884, 9 years after he left Japan, he, Horace Capron, was awarded the Order of the Rising Sun for his services transforming Hokkaido, Japan. There's a larger-than-life-size statue, there's the statue, of Horace in Sapporo, Japan. Can you imagine? He came from little old Attleboro. After he left Japan, he returned to Washington and sold his house that he had there to be the site of Japan's first embassy. He died after attending the dedication of Washington Monument. It was 12 degrees out that day, and he was 80 years old, and he died the next day. When I bought my house, the sellers, Connie, said they had found something in the house, but they wanted to keep it. So they didn't tell me what it was, and I figured if I couldn't have it, I guess I didn't need to know what it was. But many years went by, and she must have realized how deep I was getting into this house. And I think she was downsizing, and she called me back, and she wanted to give me what it was, they had found. It was this little handmade box. It's all wallpaper lined, and it's got a little sliding cover, and it had 4 GAR things in it. This is a GAR medal, and this is another badge of some kind. And then I have a hat here with the hat band and hat badge on it. The 4 GAR items stand for Grand Army of the Republic, and that was an organization which was started after the Civil War was over, and the returned soldiers missed all that camaraderie they had had during the war, sitting around the campfire at night and telling their stories and singing and whatever. They decided to start a new group and called it the Grand Army of the Republic. There was a GAR post in just about every town. They had them everywhere, and of course they're all dead now, so that's why they're gone, because they had to have been in the Civil War. It's funny when you're working on stuff like this, how every once in a while, oh yeah, that's why that is, you know. But anyway, they held regular meetings where they all wore their uniforms and sat around telling their stories, their war stories. There's a picture of the group too. Yeah, that's a picture of the Attleboro GAR chapter. And so Frank Capron is in there somewhere, but I don't know which one he is. By the way, I bought this hat at a yard sale, and I put the hat badge and the hat cord on it. That's not a real old hat. I just spray painted it with some black paint. I had to do a lot of research to find out which Capron was in the GAR, but I found Frank Capron, and he was the son of Nelson, who was Dennis's brother. He was born in 1844 and was a skirt maker who enlisted and was mustered in 1862. He was stationed in Drury Bluff, Virginia, and was wounded in the knee. He was discharged for disability, and he died in 1889 at 44 years old. He's buried in Woodlawn, back to Attleboro. There was another Frank Capron, and in the 1890s, he ran a stable business on South Main Street. Around 1912, his son Harry wanted to sell gasoline. Let's face it, in 1912, the stable business probably wasn't very popular, and cars were getting much more popular. So by 1917, besides selling gas for the automobiles, he was also selling Studebakers. In 1929, Harry switched from selling coal to heat your house to selling fuel oil. In 1942, he was still selling Studebakers and petroleum products, and I can still remember that gas station. It was on the corner of South Main and Wall Street. It's not there anymore, but I can remember it. Then there was, so these are all ads. I took these out of the city directories, the 1897, the 1905, and the 1942, and you can see how they progressed through the years of changing how their business went to keep it alive. The next thing is Capron School, which was built in 1896 in the same style building as Farmers School, Briggs Corner, and Pleasant Street schools. They wanted to start taking into consideration things like ventilation and lighting that they never had in the one-room schoolhouses. So that's why they built this type of a school. The cost, you ready for this, was $7,864. You can all laugh because you know what we just paid for a school. It was used as a school until the 1930s, and then it eventually became the Girl Scout house, which is what it still is today. It's on the corner of Prospect and 4th Street. And it was probably named Capron because Everett Capron, I have a picture of Everett Capron, there's Everett Capron. He's the one who gave the land to the Capron Park for the zoo. But he was the son of Dennis, and he was also a school committee member for many years, and he was chairman for years also. So I think that's why they might have named it Capron School after him. He was the superintendent of the Attleboro Gas and Light Company too. I usually go to the Christmas fairs at all the churches. And the one at Second Congo, I started noticing in the past couple years that the names of two women were carved into the fireplace surround in one of the rooms. They were Melina and Mary J. Capron. And I had to do a lot of searching to find out who these women were. And I still don't know why they're on that fireplace. They must have given money to the church or something. But they were the daughters of Sumner and Sabra Capron, who got married in 1831. Melina was born in 1833, and she died in 1896. And Mary J. was born in 1841 and died in 1891. These two lady Caprons never married because I saw their death records at City Hall, and they were still Caprons. They volunteered to help the troops in 1861. So they were the women's movement. Melina was the leader of the Soldiers' Aid Society, and Mary J. was the vice president of the library. And I just went to the library this afternoon and they verified it. They found it in Daggett's that said she was the vice president of the library when the library first started. She was also a writer, and she wrote stories instructional to little people and useful to their elders. So I guess that means they were good for kids, children, and they probably helped the parents too. Up until these two women, I haven't mentioned very many women. And you know that saying, behind every successful man there's a woman? Well, since I haven't mentioned the women, I've got another story to tell you, and it involves girls, and it's my favorite, and I know a lot of you have heard it before. But I love to tell it. It's my favorite story too. Horatia and Abby were two of Jacob and Deborah's daughters, the ones that lived in my house in Deborah's box here. Abby was born in 1810 and Horatia in 1812, and both were homeschooled because that's what the mothers did back then. We don't hear about the mothers. You know, the two ladies that I was just talking about, they were both single, and most of the other ladies that were single were school moms. And so all the rest of the mothers, and those mothers worked. They had to feed the chickens and make the soap, make the candles, you know, make the food and raise these girls at home because the little girls couldn't go to school. They had to stay home. So they were so ingenious, though. They taught the little girls how to sew by doing samplers. And by doing samplers, they taught them how to do the alphabet, how to do the numbers, how to do Bible verses, how to do genealogy, how to do poetry. You know, you can find all of those things on samplers. But all the time, they were learning how to sew. In 2020, we're up to 2020 now. You all know 2020. That was just a few years ago. A Capron in Pennsylvania found these two samplers, this one and that one, in her grandmother's things. It was during the pandemic, so she was going through stuff just like everybody else was. She almost threw them out, but she saw the word Attleboro on them and decided to send them back to Attleboro. This was 2020. These were made in 1820. 200 years after they were made, they came back to Attleboro. It took me a few days to put all this together because I was just kind of baffled by the whole thing. And then I realized, and I might even lose it, they were made 200 years ago in my house because it was Horatia and Abby, and those were Deborah and Jacob's kids. So, during the Civil War, the ladies also, the ladies in Attleboro would sew the uniforms for all the people going to war, all the men. And the town was sectioned off by what part of the uniform they were making. This part of Attleboro did the shirts, this part of Attleboro, all the women did the pants. And Abby, the one that did that sampler, was in charge of underwear. So she was a part of Attleboro's history, and this is at least a part of the history of Attleboro Caprons. I will say one other thing, that in 2006, I had a phone call, I wasn't home, and somebody was calling from Dallas, Texas. When I got home, I listened to the message, and it said, "Hello, my name is Banfield Capron." I nearly died. So I called him back, and he told me all about himself in Dallas, Texas, and within 2 weeks, he was at my doorstep. And I spent the whole day with him and his wife going around to everything Capron I could in Attleboro. And then he left and went back to Dallas, Texas. And then I got this in the mail. And it says, "This is the official document certifying Marian Wrightington, who lives in the Capron house, is adopted as an official member of the Banfield Capron family." So that's it.